What happens when someone vanishes without a trace? When a plane disappears midair, or a person leaves their home and is never seen again? These are the mysteries that defy answers, disappearances that remain unsolved, even decades later. If stories like these keep you curious, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because in every episode, we'll dive into another disappearance mystery that will keep you questioning. Amelia Earhart. In the summer of 1937, the world watched as Amelia Earhart, one of the most celebrated aviators of her time, embarked on a daring mission to circumnavigate the globe. She carried with her not only the hopes of aviation enthusiasts, but also the weight of history, seeking to prove what few had ever imagined possible. Yet, somewhere over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, her voice faded into static, and her plane was never seen again. Earhart was no ordinary pilot. From her earliest flights, she displayed a fearless commitment to pushing the boundaries of flight, setting altitude records and becoming the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. By 1937, her fame was global, and her Lockheed Electra aircraft had been carefully outfitted for the world flight. Alongside her navigator, Fred Noonan, she departed Miami in June, tracing a path that would span nearly 29,000 miles. The journey was not without challenges. Delays, mechanical issues, and unpredictable weather forced adjustments. But by late June, they had successfully crossed Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. The final and most dangerous stretch awaited, the long Pacific crossing. On July 2nd, Earhart and Noonan departed from Lae, New Guinea, bound for tiny Howland Island, a remote strip of land less than 2 miles long. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca waited near the island, ready to provide radio communication and guidance. But contact quickly faltered. Earhart's last known transmissions revealed rising concern. She could not find the island, and fuel was running low. Radio operators aboard the Itasca listened helplessly as her voice faded.
Moments later, silença.
Despite one of the largest search efforts in naval history, no trace of the plane was ever found. Over the decades, theories multiplied. Some suggest the Electra simply ran out of fuel and sank beneath the waves, resting somewhere on the ocean floor. Others believe Earhart may have crash-landed on an uninhabited island, such as Nkomororo, where fragments of possible aircraft debris and personal items have been discovered. A more controversial theory imagines capture by Japanese forces, a prisoner of war hidden from the public eye. Each theory holds fragments of truth, but none has ever solved the puzzle completely. The Pacific, vast and unforgiving, has kept its secret well. Modern expeditions equipped with sonar, submersibles, and satellite imaging have scoured the ocean floor, chasing faint clues that might lead to the final answer. And yet, nearly a century later, the mystery persists. Was Amelia Earhart's fate sealed by the ocean's depths? Or does some forgotten island still hold the silent remnants of her last flight? The world may never know, but the image of her Electra disappearing into the horizon remains one of history's most haunting reminders of ambition, courage, and the unknown. D.B. Cooper. In the fading light of November 24, 1971, a man boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, carrying nothing but a briefcase and a calm, unassuming presence. He gave his name simply as Dan Cooper. Within hours, that name would echo across headlines, whispered with intrigue and disbelief, forever etched into the annals of American mystery. Cooper appeared ordinary, wearing a dark suit, a black tie, and sunglasses. He ordered a drink, paid in cash, and blended seamlessly among the passengers. Yet, in his briefcase, he carried a secret. Moments after takeoff, he handed a note to a flight attendant. At first, she slipped it into her pocket, assuming it was just another attempt at conversation. But Cooper leaned closer and quietly revealed the truth. The note warned that he carried a bomb. The demand was precise: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle for refueling. Remarkably, the airline and FBI complied, fearing for the lives of the 36 passengers on board. The plane landed, the passengers were released unharmed, received his ransom and parachutes. What followed next would become the heart of the enigma. As the Boeing 727 ascended again into the night sky, Cooper directed the pilots toward Mexico City, instructing them to fly low and slow. Somewhere over the rugged forests of southwest Washington, he lowered the plane's rear stairway, carrying the ransom money and wearing one of the parachutes. He vanished into the darkness of a stormy sky. No one ever saw him again. What makes the story even more compelling is the trail of uncertainty that followed. Despite one of the largest manhunts in FBI history, not a single confirmed trace of Cooper was found. His identity remains unknown, his fate unresolved. In 1980, a boy discovered bundles of decaying cash near the Columbia River, bills that matched the serial numbers from Cooper's ransom. Yet, no body, no parachute, and no further evidence surfaced. Theories abound. Some argue Cooper perished in the wilderness, his jump doomed by poor weather and unforgiving terrain. Others believe he survived, blending into society, perhaps even watching as his own legend grew. Over the decades, dozens of suspects were investigated, from ex-military men to career criminals, but none could be conclusively linked to the hijacker. In 2016, the FBI officially closed the case, acknowledging that the mystery may never be solved. But the legend of D.B. Cooper continues to endure, a symbol of audacity and the unknown. Perhaps Cooper's greatest escape was not from the airplane that night, but from history itself. For in the shadows of unanswered questions, his story lives on, hovering like a figure suspended midair, caught between myth and reality. Jimmy Hoffa. Few disappearances in American history have left such a lasting mark as the vanishing of Jimmy Hoffa. A man whose name was once synonymous with power, labor, and controversy, would one day vanish without a trace, leaving behind decades of speculation and unanswered questions. James Riddle Hoffa, better known as Jimmy Hoffa, rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most influential labor leaders in the United States. By the mid-20th century, he had secured his place as president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, a union that represented hundreds of thousands of truck drivers across the country. To his supporters, Hoffa was a champion of the working class. To his critics, he was a figure whose ties to organized crime blurred the line between leadership and corruption. Hoffa's power was undeniable. He negotiated deals that strengthened unions, but his relationships with the mafia drew the attention of federal investigators. In 1967, he was convicted of bribery and jury tampering, leading to a prison sentence. Yet, even behind bars, Hoffa remained a looming presence in the world of organized labor. His release in 1971, reportedly aided by President Richard Nixon, marked the beginning of a tense new chapter. Hoffa sought to reclaim leadership of the Teamsters, a move that unsettled many, including those with deep criminal ties. On July 30th, 1975, Hoffa was last seen outside the Machu's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. He was reportedly there for a meeting with two known mafia figures, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano. Witnesses placed Hoffa in the parking lot, waiting, but he was never seen again. His car was later found abandoned, but Hoffa himself had vanished. What followed was one of the most extensive investigations in FBI history. Agents combed through fields, warehouses, and even rumors of hidden burial sites. Over the years, countless theories have emerged. Some claim Hoffa's body was buried beneath the old Giants Stadium in New Jersey. Others suggest he was cremated in a mafia-controlled incinerator. Despite decades of searching, no conclusive evidence has ever surfaced. Forensic breakthroughs, wiretaps, and confessions from mob informants have offered fragments of possibility, yet none have solved the riddle. The mystery of Jimmy Hoffa endures not only because of his disappearance, but because of the shadow it casts over American labor history and organized crime. Nearly 50 years later, Jimmy Hoffa remains both a symbol and a ghost, a reminder of power, ambition, and the dangerous alliances that shaped an era. His fate may never be known, but the questions surrounding his disappearance continue to echo through history. And so, the story of Jimmy Hoffa lingers, caught between fact and speculation, a mystery still waiting for its final chapter. Madeleine McCann in the quiet evening of May 3, 2007, in the seaside resort of Praia da Luz, Portugal, a family holiday turned into one of the world's most haunting mysteries. 3-year-old Madeleine McCann vanished from her bed while her parents dined just a short distance away. What followed was not just a desperate search for a missing child, but the beginning of a global enigma that still grips attention nearly 2 decades later. The facts are stark. Madeleine was last seen sleeping in a ground-floor apartment alongside her younger siblings. Her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were dining with friends at a nearby restaurant, checking in periodically. But sometime between those checks, Madeleine disappeared without a trace. The window was open, the bed empty, and the silence of the night was broken only by questions that remain unanswered. Investigators launched one of the most extensive missing person inquiries in modern history. Portuguese police, assisted by British authorities, sifted through evidence, interviewed witnesses, and followed countless leads. Early theories ranged from abduction by a stranger to burglary gone wrong, to darker possibilities involving those closest to her. Yet each avenue seemed to end in uncertainty, creating more shadows than light. The search soon spilled beyond Portugal. Reported sightings came in from across Europe and even as far as North Africa. Millions of people followed every headline. Madeleine's face, with her distinctive coloboma in the right eye, became one of the most recognized in the world. Appeals for information ran in newspapers, television, and online, transforming this tragedy into a case unlike any before it. Years passed, and with them waves of renewed investigation. Scotland Yard launched Operation Grange in 2011, revisiting old evidence with fresh eyes. New suspects were questioned, new theories tested, but the truth remained elusive. A German man later emerged as a prime suspect, linked to other serious crimes. Yet even with this development, no definitive answers surfaced. What makes the disappearance of Madeleine McCann endure as a mystery is not only the absence of closure, but the vast scope of what is unknown. There was no trace of forced entry, no conclusive forensic evidence, no verified witness account of her being taken. In the modern age of surveillance and technology, a child vanished as if into thin air, leaving behind only echoes of uncertainty. And so, the case lives on. Part tragedy, part riddle, part cautionary tale. Families remember, investigators persist, and the world waits. Somewhere lies the truth of what happened on that night in Portugal. But until it is revealed, Madeleine McCann remains a name spoken not with certainty, but with haunting wonder. Natalie Holloway on a warm summer night in 2005. A young woman vanished without a trace. Her name was Natalie Holloway, and her disappearance on the island of Aruba became one of the most haunting mysteries of the 21st century. Natalie was just 18 years old, a recent high school graduate from Alabama. She had traveled with classmates to Aruba for a celebratory trip before beginning the next chapter of her life. To friends and family, she was full of promise, bright, ambitious, and ready to embrace the future. But what began as a joyous vacation quickly transformed into an enduring enigma. On the evening of May 30th, Natalie was last seen leaving a nightclub called Carlos and Charlie's. Witnesses reported she was in the company of 3 young men, including a Dutch student named Joran van der Sloot. According to the men, they dropped her off at her hotel. But Natalie never returned to her room. The alarm was raised when she failed to board her flight home. Local police launched an immediate search. Volunteers combed the beaches, divers scoured the waters, and helicopters swept the island from above. The case drew massive international attention, with news crews descending on Aruba and her parents pleading for answers. Yet, despite global coverage and countless leads, Natalie's fate remained elusive. Authorities detained and questioned Joran van der Sloot multiple times, as well as the brothers who were with him that night. Their stories shifted, contradicting one another, but no physical evidence tied them conclusively to her disappearance. Speculation grew. Some believed she may have been harmed and her remains hidden in the waters surrounding the island. Others suspected a cover-up, or that Natalie had fallen victim to human trafficking. Each theory added layers of uncertainty, deepening the sense of unease. Over the years, developments trickled in. Joran van der Sloot was later convicted in an unrelated murder case in Peru, which reignited suspicions about his possible involvement in Natalie's disappearance. At times, he even offered supposed confessions, only to retract or alter them, leaving investigators and the Holloway family trapped in a cycle of hope and despair. In 2012, Natalie was officially declared legally dead, though her body has never been found. For her family, closure remains incomplete, and the unanswered questions linger. Nearly 2 decades have passed since that fateful night in Aruba, but the mystery endures. Who holds the truth of Natalie Holloway's final hours? Was it buried beneath the waves, hidden by silence, or lost to time itself? The world may never know. Percy Fawcett in the early 20th century, the dense and largely uncharted Amazon rainforest was home to countless legends. Among the explorers who sought to unravel its secrets, few names stand out as boldly as Percy Harrison Fawcett. A British surveyor, soldier, and adventurer, Fawcett became captivated by the idea that deep within the jungle lay remnants of a lost civilization, what he called the City of Z. Fawcett's fascination grew from ancient manuscripts, local legends, and fragments of evidence he encountered during his expeditions. He was no stranger to the Amazon's dangers. For years, he mapped rivers, measured borders, and endured disease, hostile wildlife, and the ever-present threat of attack. Yet he was convinced that beyond the endless green lay something extraordinary. A city that predated European arrival, a society with advanced architecture and culture hidden beneath centuries of overgrowth. In 1925, with his son Jack and Jack's close friend Raleigh Rimmel, Fawcett launched his most ambitious expedition. Unlike previous journeys, this one was shrouded in secrecy. He refused to reveal exact routes, fearing rivals or treasure hunters would beat him to the discovery. They carried minimal supplies, trusting they could survive off the land and the goodwill of local tribes. Before leaving, Fawcett sent letters that brimmed with confidence. He believed he was on the brink of proving his theory to the world. The party's trail led them deep into Mato Grosso, Brazil. At first, reports trickled back through messengers. Fawcett was in good health, spirits were high, and progress was steady. But then, silence. No further messages arrived. Weeks turned into months, and concern grew. Rescue missions were mounted, but each failed, hindered by hostile terrain and the suspicion of indigenous groups wary of outsiders. Speculations spread quickly. Some believed Fawcett and his companions were killed by tribes protecting their land. Others suggested disease, starvation, or the jungle itself had swallowed them whole. Yet there were also whispers of survival, that perhaps Fawcett had found the very city he sought and chose to remain, cutting ties with the outside world. Over the years, countless explorers tried to retrace his path. Many met their own grim fates, succumbing to the same jungle that had claimed Fawcett. The mystery only deepened as fragments of artifacts and unconfirmed accounts surfaced, hinting at possibilities but never delivering certainty. Today, nearly a century later, Percy Fawcett's disappearance remains one of exploration's enduring enigmas. Was he misguided, chasing myths through endless forest? Or was he closer to truth than we imagine? A truth still concealed beneath the Amazon's vast canopy? The jungle keeps its secrets well, and somewhere within its depths may lie the answer to what became of Percy Fawcett, and whether the City of Z was more than just a dream. Lord Lucan, the night of November 7, 1974, remains one of the most puzzling chapters in British criminal history. At the center of it stands Richard John Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan, better known as Lord Lucan. Aristocratic, charming, and deeply entrenched in London's high society, Lucan's disappearance would transform him from a celebrated figure into one of the world's most enduring fugitives. Born into privilege in 1934, Lucan was educated at Eton and later served briefly in the Coldstream Guards. He cultivated a reputation as a gambler, frequenting exclusive clubs and mingling with London's elite. But behind the polished exterior, his life was unraveling. A troubled marriage to Veronica Duncan collapsed into a bitter custody battle over their 3 children. The family's fractured life reached its breaking point in the autumn of 1974. On that November evening, Lucan's children's nanny, Sandra Rivet, was bludgeoned to death in the basement of the Lucan family's Belgravia home. Veronica, Lady Lucan, was also attacked but managed to escape, bloodied and terrified, into the streets, where she cried out for help. She named her estranged husband as the assailant. What followed was a manhunt that quickly turned into legend. Lucan was seen briefly later that night, visiting a friend's house in Uckfield, Sussex. He appeared shaken, disheveled, and, according to witnesses, admitted to being involved in a terrible catastrophe. His borrowed Ford Corsair was later found abandoned near the English Channel, stained with blood. Inside were a lead pipe and bandages, objects that deepened suspicion but offered no closure. From that moment on, Lord Lucan vanished without a trace. Theories soon multiplied. Some claimed he ended his life at sea, throwing himself into the Channel after realizing the enormity of what had occurred. Others insisted he escaped abroad, aided by a network of wealthy acquaintances who protected him from justice. Over the decades, alleged sightings spanned continents, from Australia to Africa, even as far as New Zealand. None were ever confirmed. The British courts, in his absence, declared him officially dead in 1999 and issued a death certificate in 2016. Yet the mystery refuses to fade. Was Lucan truly the murderer of Sandra Rivet, or could he have been framed in the chaos of that night? Did he live out his days in quiet exile under a new identity, or did the English Channel claim him in his final act of desperation? Nearly 50 years later, Lord Lucan remains a figure suspended between fact and speculation. His title, his fortune, and his reputation were lost, but his story endures as one of the most enigmatic vanishings of the 20th century. Some mysteries find answers, others linger in silence, and the shadow of Lord Lucan continues to walk that narrow space between history and legend. Harold Holt was not just a political leader. He was the 17th Prime Minister of Australia, a man whose career was marked by ambition, energy, and controversy. On December 17, 1967, he entered the waters off Cheviot Beach in Victoria for what seemed to be a routine swim. He was never seen again. The suddenness of his disappearance stunned the nation and has since become one of the most enduring mysteries in Australian history. The conditions that day were far from ideal. Cheviot Beach is known for its powerful currents, hidden rips, and unpredictable surf. Holt, despite being an experienced swimmer, ventured into the waves. Witnesses reported that within minutes, he was pulled away by the tide and vanished beneath the surface. A massive search operation followed, involving divers, helicopters, and naval vessels. Yet no trace of his body was ever recovered. The absence of evidence left room for speculation. Some believed Holt succumbed to exhaustion or was dragged under by the current, a tragic accident compounded by his known health issues, including a shoulder injury and fatigue. Others pointed to his political position during a turbulent time. Australia was deeply involved in the Vietnam War, and Holt's close alliance with the United States made him a controversial figure. From these tensions grew theories of espionage, kidnapping, and even defection. One of the more unusual claims suggested Holt was taken by a Chinese submarine waiting offshore, spirited away due to alleged ties or sympathies. Another idea posited suicide, though friends and colleagues described him as optimistic and future-focused, with no signs of despair. Still, the lack of a body meant every possibility remained open in the public imagination. In 2005, the official coroner's report finally declared Holt's death as accidental drowning, a conclusion grounded in the dangerous conditions of Cheviot Beach and the evidence available. Yet for many, this explanation did little to dispel the aura of uncertainty. The sheer improbability of a sitting prime minister vanishing without a trace continues to fuel debate. Today, Holt's disappearance stands as more than a national tragedy. It is a reminder of how even the most public figures can slip suddenly into mystery. The beach where he was last seen has become a place of reflection, marked by a memorial that honors his service, while his story endures as part of Australia's folklore. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Harold Holt mystery is not what we know, but what remains unknown. A man who held the highest office in the country stepped into the sea and simply never returned. The waves closed over him, leaving behind questions that no inquiry has been able to answer. And so, the ocean keeps its secret, as it always has. Ettore Majorana was one of the most brilliant physicists of the 20th century. A mind so sharp that even Enrico Fermi compared him to geniuses like Galileo and Newton. Yet, despite his towering intellect, Majorana's name is not remembered for his scientific discoveries alone. Instead, it is tied to one of history's most enduring mysteries, his unexplained disappearance. Born in 1906 in Catania, Sicily, Majorana's brilliance was evident from a young age. He joined the legendary group of Italian physicists known as the Via Panisperna Boys, who were at the forefront of nuclear research. His contributions were not only groundbreaking, but also ahead of their time. He developed theories that predicted the existence of what we now call Majorana particles, fundamental entities that could be their own antiparticles, an idea still investigated by modern physics. By the late 1930s, Majorana's reputation was immense, but so was his enigmatic nature. Colleagues often described him as intensely private, withdrawn, and at times, troubled by the implications of his own work. In 1938, while holding a prestigious position at the University of Naples, he suddenly vanished. On March 25th of that year, Majorana withdrew money from his bank account and sent a series of cryptic letters to colleagues. One message hinted at despair, almost a farewell, while another retracted those sentiments and suggested he would return. Shortly afterward, he boarded a ship from Naples to Palermo, but when the vessel docked, Majorana was nowhere to be found. The Italian government launched a massive investigation. Reports surfaced of sightings in monasteries in South America and even in Germany during World War II. Some believed he had taken his own life by jumping into the sea during that fateful voyage. Others insisted he staged his disappearance deliberately, abandoning the world of science to live in seclusion. A few speculated that he had been recruited, or perhaps coerced, into secret military research, given the political climate and the looming shadow of nuclear weapons. Even decades later, evidence remained elusive. In 2011, an Italian court concluded that Majorana had lived in Venezuela for years under a false identity, based on testimony and photographs. But this claim, like so many others, raised more questions than it answered. Today, Ettore Majorana stands at the crossroads of science and mystery. His theories continue to inspire physicists searching for answers to the universe's deepest puzzles, while his fate remains unsolved. Did he choose anonymity to escape the moral burden of his discoveries? Was he lost to the sea, or hidden away in a new life far from Europe? The truth, like the particles he once described, seems to exist in two states at once, present and absent, forever suspended in the realm of possibility. Glenn Miller's disappearance remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. At the height of his career, Miller was not just a celebrated bandleader. He was a cultural phenomenon. His orchestra defined the sound of the swing era, producing timeless classics that lifted spirits during a time of global conflict. But on December 15, 1944, as the Second World War raged, Glenn Miller boarded a small aircraft in England, bound for Paris, and was never seen again. The flight was supposed to be routine, a short hop across the English Channel to prepare for performances that would entertain Allied troops and boost morale. Miller had become a major figure in the war effort, leaving behind a lucrative career in the United States to serve his country through music. His passion for supporting the troops was undeniable, but so too were the risks of traveling in wartime Europe. The plane, a single-engine UC-64 Norseman, lifted off from an airfield near London in poor weather conditions. Moments after takeoff, it vanished without a trace.
No vrecage, no bares, no definitivo ver-se.
Over the years, investigators and historians have pieced together theories, each offering clues yet none providing closure. One widely accepted explanation is that the plane succumbed to icy conditions. The Norseman was not well equipped for severe winter weather, and it's believed that ice buildup may have caused the aircraft to stall and plunge into the sea. If so, the wreckage could lie hidden somewhere beneath the cold waters of the channel. Another theory draws from wartime records. On the very day Miller disappeared, Allied bombers returning from a mission were reported to have jettisoned and used bombs over the channel. Some have speculated that Miller's small plane may have flown into the path of the falling explosives, becoming an accidental casualty of war. Though compelling, evidence for this remains circumstantial. There are also less conventional stories. Whispers of espionage and secret missions have circulated for decades. Some claim Miller was on a covert assignment. Others suggest foul play linked to his growing influence. Yet none of these tales have been verified, leaving them more in the realm of rumor than fact. What remains undeniable is the profound impact of his absence. Glenn Miller was just 40 years old, and his disappearance cut short a life and career still brimming with promise. His music, however, never vanished. Songs like Moonlight Serenade and In the Mood continue to echo across generations, preserving his legacy even as the mystery of his final flight endures. Nearly 8 decades later, the waters of the channel still hold their secrets. Search efforts have yielded no conclusive discoveries, and Miller's fate remains suspended between history and legend. The man who gave the world harmony and rhythm left behind a silence that has never been filled. A silence that keeps us wondering what truly happened on that winter day in 1944. The Sodder children on Christmas Eve, 1945, a quiet farmhouse in Fayetteville, West Virginia, became the setting of one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. It was the Sodder family home, where George and Jenny Sodder lived with their 10 children. That night, what began as a holiday celebration ended in tragedy, and in unanswered questions that still linger decades later. Shortly after midnight, fire consumed the house. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children escaped, but 5 others, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were believed to have been trapped inside. As flames tore through the wooden structure, the Sodders tried desperately to save them. Yet what unfolded next did not follow the path of a typical fire tragedy. Instead, it opened a trail of contradictions, mysteries, and possible cover-ups. When the blaze finally subsided, investigators expected to find the remains of the 5 missing children, but the ashes revealed nothing. No bones, no physical trace of the siblings who had vanished. Experts argued that even in intense house fires, human bones are not fully consumed. The absence of remains puzzled fire professionals and forensic specialists. Had the children really perished in the flames, or had something else happened before the fire even began? The case became even more complex with the evidence that surfaced. The Sodders recalled odd incidents in the months leading up to the fire. George had been outspoken against Mussolini and fascist Italy, which made him enemies within the local Italian immigrant community. Strange visitors had come to the house, warning that harm would come to the family unless George kept silent. A salesman once threatened that their home would go up in smoke. These details, dismissed at the time, resurfaced with haunting weight after the fire. On the night of the disaster, a series of failures raised further suspicion. The family's telephone line had been cut. The fire truck arrived hours late. And when George attempted to use his coal trucks to climb and reach the children's windows, neither vehicle would start, despite working fine the previous day. Each failed attempt added to the impression that the tragedy was not simply accidental. Over the years, reported sightings of the Sodder children fueled speculation. Witnesses claimed to have seen them in passing cars, at restaurants, or even living under assumed identities. One woman reported seeing the children peering from a vehicle as the fire raged. Another claimed they were staying at a boarding house in Charleston. While none of these leads were ever confirmed, they added to the chilling possibility that the children had been taken rather than lost in the fire. The Sodder family never stopped searching. They erected a billboard along Route 16, displaying the children's faces and offering a reward for information. It became a landmark, a reminder to passersby that the case was unresolved and that 5 young lives had vanished without explanation. The billboard stood for decades, a testament to the family's refusal to accept the official version of events. Despite countless investigations, interviews, and theories, no definitive answer emerged. Some believed the fire was an accident, fueled by faulty wiring. Others argued it was arson, linked to George's political stance. And then there were those who felt certain the children had survived, spirited away in the chaos of the night. The mystery of the Sodder children rests in the uneasy space between tragedy and conspiracy, between evidence and silence. The unanswered questions remain. Did the flames erase all traces of 5 young lives, or did the fire conceal something much darker? And as long as the truth stays hidden, the Sodder children's story will linger like smoke from a fire long extinguished, visible, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. The Beaumont children, 3 children, a sunny day, and a beach filled with life. That was January 26, 1966, in Glenelg, South Australia. A day that would become one of the darkest mysteries in Australian history. The Beaumont children, Jane, age 9, Arna, age 7, and Grant, age 4, were like any ordinary siblings. That morning, they boarded a bus to Glenelg Beach, just a few miles from their home. It was not unusual. By the 1960s, children were trusted with such independence. But what seemed ordinary would soon become extraordinary, and in the most unsettling way. The children arrived at the beach around 10 a.m. Witnesses later recalled seeing them play near the water, laughing and running across the sand. They bought pastries from a local bakery, paid with a £1 note their mother hadn't given them. This small detail suggested that someone else, a stranger or perhaps an acquaintance, was with them that day. Several beachgoers reported seeing the children with a tall, thin man, described as having a suntan and blondish hair. He appeared relaxed, chatting and playing with the children as though they knew him well. Jane, the eldest, was said to be shy and responsible, making it unlikely she would have trusted a stranger. Yet on this day she seemed at ease. By midday, the children were spotted leaving the beach in the company of this man. They carried a bag, perhaps belongings, perhaps something else. It was the last confirmed sighting of Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont. When they failed to return home by the afternoon, their mother grew concerned. Hours turned into panic, and by evening, the police were involved. The search that followed was one of the largest in Australian history. Beaches, parks, and nearby neighborhoods were combed for clues. Hundreds of volunteers joined the effort, but there were no traces, no clothing, no belongings, no evidence of struggle. It was as though the 3 children had vanished into thin air. Over the years, theories multiplied. Some investigators believed the children had been abducted by a single perpetrator, perhaps a man who had gained their trust over multiple encounters. Others suggested a more elaborate plot, even linking the disappearance to known criminals of the time. Leads surfaced. Reported sightings across Australia, letters claiming knowledge of the children's fate, and supposed confessions from prisoners. Each clue, when investigated, dissolved into uncertainty. One of the most enduring theories pointed to a man named Bevan Spencer von Einem, later convicted of the 1980s family murders in Adelaide. Yet no concrete evidence ever tied him to the Beaumont case. Another claim in the early 2000s suggested the children were buried beneath a factory in North Plimpton. Excavations revealed nothing. As decades passed, the case became etched into Australian collective memory. For many, the Beaumont children symbolized the end of an era of innocence, when children once roamed freely before the fear of predators reshaped parenting. To this day, the mystery remains open, with occasional tips still reaching investigators, though the trail has long grown cold. No bodies were ever found. No definitive answers were uncovered. Only questions remain about who the mysterious man on the beach was and how 3 children could disappear from a crowded shoreline in broad daylight. The case endures not because of what is known, but because of what will never be fully understood. Each retelling raises the same haunting thought. Somewhere, hidden beneath the layers of time, lies the truth of what happened to Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont. And until that truth is uncovered, their story remains an echo, fading, yet never silent. The Lost Colony, Roanoke, on the eastern coast of North America. More than 4 centuries ago, a colony was founded that would later vanish without a trace. Known as the Lost Colony of Roanoke, it remains one of history's most enduring enigmas. In 1587, more than 100 English settlers, led by Governor John White, established a small community on Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. The colony was part of England's early attempts to secure a foothold in the New World. Families, artisans, and farmers made the perilous journey across the Atlantic, determined to build new lives in unfamiliar territory. Shortly after their arrival, White returned to England to gather supplies. His absence, however, stretched far longer than anyone expected. England was on the brink of war with Spain, and the seas were treacherous. By the time White managed to return in 1590, 3 years had passed. What he discovered, or rather what he did not discover, would become the source of endless speculation. The settlement was deserted. Houses stood empty, stripped of valuables but showing no signs of violence. Personal belongings, tools, and weapons were gone. The only clue carved into a wooden post was a single word: Crotone. Nearby, the letters CRO were etched into a tree. White believed this indicated that the colonists had moved to Crotone Island, now known as Hatteras Island. Yet no bodies, no graves, and no further evidence of their fate were ever found. Theories quickly emerged. Some suggest the settlers sought refuge with the friendly Crotone tribe, assimilating into their community. Oral histories among indigenous peoples hint at light-skinned children and English-style tools appearing in later generations, suggesting intermarriage and cultural blending. Others argue that the settlers, desperate for survival, may have split into smaller groups, scattering inland and eventually disappearing into rival tribal territories. Another possibility is more grim. Starvation, disease, or hostile attacks may have overwhelmed the colonists, leaving little trace behind. Archaeological digs on Roanoke and Hatteras Islands have uncovered European artifacts, including a sword hilt, copper rings, and fragments of pottery. Yet these findings raise as many questions as they answer. Were they remnants of the original colony, or items traded years later? Modern science has tried to unravel the puzzle. In recent decades, DNA projects have sought to trace descendants of the settlers among Native American communities, but no conclusive matches have been established. Satellite imaging and advanced excavation techniques have revealed promising sites inland, suggesting the colonists may have abandoned the island entirely, moving toward the Chesapeake Bay as some records imply. Still, nothing definitive has surfaced. The lost colony remains suspended between history and myth, its silence echoing across centuries. Was it a tale of survival through adaptation, a story of assimilation into indigenous nations, or a tragic ending erased by time and wilderness? Standing on the windswept shores of Roanoke today, one can almost sense the uncertainty that must have gripped the settlers as they faced hunger, isolation, and the vast unknown. Their story endures not because we know how it ended, but because we do not. Perhaps, buried beneath the shifting sands or hidden in forgotten records, the answer waits. Until then, the word carved into the wood Crotone remains both a clue and a haunting reminder of a colony that vanished into history's shadows. The Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers on the edge of Scotland's windswept Outer Hebrides lie the Flannan Isles, a remote and desolate cluster of rocks in the Atlantic Ocean. For centuries, these islands have been a place of solitude, battered by storms and rarely visited. Yet, in December of 1900, they became the center of one of the most enduring maritime mysteries in modern history: the unexplained disappearance of 3 lighthouse keepers. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse, completed in 1899, stood as a vital beacon for ships navigating the perilous waters of the North Atlantic. Operated by the Northern Lighthouse Board, the structure was built to withstand the elements, perched high above crashing waves. Inside, 3 keepers lived in rotation, maintaining the light and ensuring ships remained safe from hidden reefs and unpredictable seas. On December 15, 1900, the steamer Archtor passed by the lighthouse. The crew reported that the light was not shining, a troubling detail considering the critical importance of its beam. When the ship reached land, it relayed this concern. Days passed before the lighthouse relief vessel, the Hesperus, finally set sail to investigate. What the relief crew discovered upon arrival was unsettling. The island was eerily silent. No keepers appeared at the dock to greet them, as was customary. The entry gate was closed, and the living quarters inside were in an orderly state. The beds were made, the kitchen was tidy, and a meal had been left uneaten. The only signs of disturbance lay outside. 2 sets of oilskins, the heavy waterproof coats used against storms, were missing, but a third remained, suggesting one man may have gone outside without proper protection. Further inspection revealed damage to a supply box near a crane on the western landing. Heavy ropes were strewn across the rocks, as if they had been torn from their storage. The logbook entries added another layer of mystery. They described severe storms on December 12th, unusual agitation among the men, and one keeper's apparent anxiety. The final entry, dated December 15th, simply noted that the storm had passed and all was well. But on that very night, the lighthouse fell dark. Speculation about what happened has never ceased. The most accepted theory is that the keepers were caught by a massive wave while securing equipment on the cliffside. The Flannan Isles are known for their sudden swells, where the ocean rises unexpectedly and crashes with immense force. If all 3 men were outside, one wave could have swept them away before they had time to react. Yet not everyone is convinced. Questions remain about why one keeper would have left the safety of the lighthouse without his protective gear, or why all 3 men, trained and experienced, would abandon their post simultaneously. Some suggest foul play, others whisper of madness brought on by isolation. In folklore, tales emerged of supernatural forces, ghostly ships, sea serpents, or otherworldly beings claiming the men. In the decades since, the story of the Flannan Isles lighthouse has seeped into popular culture, inspiring poems, songs, and even works of fiction. Despite countless investigations, no trace of the missing keepers has ever been found. The sea holds its secrets well, and the lonely cliffs of the Flannan Isles remain silent witnesses to whatever transpired. More than a century later, the unanswered questions still linger in the salt air. Were the men victims of nature's fury, or of something darker, something beyond comprehension? The truth may lie somewhere on those weather-beaten rocks, or it may rest forever beneath the restless waves of the Atlantic. The Mary Celeste crew adrift in the Atlantic Ocean. In December of 1872, a merchant vessel named the Mary Celeste was discovered, sailing silently with no one aboard. The ship itself was intact, its cargo untouched, yet the crew of 10 men and women had vanished without leaving a trace. This ghost ship has remained one of the most enduring maritime mysteries in history. The Mary Celeste had departed New York City on November 7, 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy. On board were Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and a carefully selected crew of 7 experienced sailors. The ship carried a full cargo of industrial alcohol, 1,701 barrels in total, securely stowed in the hold. Conditions at departure were favorable, and there were no signs of trouble recorded in the captain's meticulous logbook. Nearly a month later, on December 4th, the British brig Dei Grazia spotted the Mary Celeste drifting aimlessly about 400 miles east of the Azores. When sailors boarded the vessel, they found no signs of struggle. The ship's rigging was partly damaged, and its single lifeboat was missing. The captain's cabin was neat, personal belongings were undisturbed, and even a sewing machine sat with clothing neatly folded beside it. Food and water supplies were plentiful, enough to last for 6 months. The ship was seaworthy, though damp and showing some wear from weather. So why had the crew abandoned a perfectly navigable ship in the open Atlantic? Theories have multiplied across the centuries. One possibility is a natural disaster, a sudden waterspout or rogue wave striking unexpectedly, forcing the crew to seek temporary refuge in the lifeboat. Another explanation points to the cargo itself. Several barrels of alcohol were found empty, possibly due to leakage. If fumes had filled the hold, Captain Briggs might have feared an imminent explosion and ordered everyone to evacuate, only for disaster to strike once they were adrift. More sinister ideas also circulate. Piracy, though not common in that region, has been considered. Yet valuables remained untouched, making robbery unlikely. Some speculated mutiny, but no evidence of violence or conflict was discovered. Even more imaginative theories suggested paranormal intervention, sea monsters, alien abductions, or curses. None of these have withstood scrutiny, but their persistence reveals the magnetic pull of the unknown. What is certain is that the Mary Celeste itself survived. Salvaged by the crew of the Dei Grazia, it was sailed into Gibraltar, where a lengthy inquiry tried and failed to provide definitive answers. The ship would continue in service for another 12 years before being deliberately wrecked in an insurance fraud scheme in 1885. But its name, by then, was already etched into legend. Today, the Mary Celeste is remembered not as a failed voyage, but as a riddle carried by the sea. No bodies were ever recovered, no lifeboat ever found, and no log entry provided a final clue. The unanswered questions linger, suspended between fact and speculation. The ship still drifts in our imagination. An empty deck, sails billowing in the wind, the ocean surrounding it in silence. And in that silence lies the unbroken mystery. What fate truly befell the crew of the Mary Celeste? Flight 19, 5 TBM Avenger cruise. On a quiet December afternoon in 1945, 5 U.S. Navy aircraft took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. They were TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, sturdy and reliable planes that had proven themselves during World War II. The flight was routine training mission 19, meant to test navigation skills over open water. But what began as an exercise would end as one of aviation history's most enduring mysteries. Flight 19 consisted of 14 men in total, led by Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, an experienced combat pilot with hundreds of hours in the air. The Avengers were to fly a triangular path, from Florida eastward into the Atlantic, north toward the Bahamas, and then back west to base. It was a simple course. Weather conditions were favorable, yet something went catastrophically wrong. Not long after leaving the coast, radio operators began to hear unsettling transmissions. Taylor's voice came through first, calm but uncertain. He reported that his compasses were malfunctioning. The magnetic readings didn't make sense. To his perception, the squadron was lost somewhere over the Florida Keys, far from their intended route. Other pilots tried to correct him, insisting that they were flying northeast, not southwest. But Taylor remained convinced they were off course. The transmissions grew more confused. Taylor said the ocean looked strange, that they couldn't see landmarks. Then, fuel gauges began dropping. Hours passed as radio operators on the mainland tried to guide the flight back. But with faulty navigation and dwindling fuel, the Avengers kept flying farther into uncertainty. At one point, Taylor's words were chilling. Everything looks wrong. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should. By nightfall, the planes were expected to ditch into the Atlantic. Search and rescue operations launched immediately. Over 300 aircraft and dozens of ships combed the seas. Yet no wreckage was ever found. Not a single piece of debris. Not an oil slick. 14 men, 5 bombers vanished completely. The mystery deepened when tragedy struck again. A PBM Mariner flying boat, dispatched to aid in the search, also disappeared with 13 crew members on board. Radio contact ceased abruptly, and though an oil slick was reported in the area, no wreckage was ever recovered. In less than 24 hours, 27 servicemen had been lost. Investigations followed. The Navy's official report concluded that Taylor likely became disoriented, mistaking the shallow waters of the Bahamas for the Gulf of Mexico. With failing compasses and low fuel, the planes probably ditched into rough seas, where they quickly sank. Yet the lack of debris raised questions. Even large aircraft rarely vanish without leaving traces. Some theories point to violent weather, sudden squalls, or strong Gulf Stream currents carrying wreckage far away. Others suggest Taylor's insistence on flying east led the squadron fatally out to sea. But over time, Flight 19 became bound to a larger legend, the Bermuda Triangle. The area, stretching from Florida to Bermuda and Puerto Rico, has long been associated with mysterious disappearances of ships and aircraft. Flight 19 seemed to embody this enigma perfectly. Experienced men, capable machines, ideal conditions, and then nothing. Decades later, divers and explorers have searched the ocean floor extensively. Wrecks of TBM Avengers have been found off Florida's coast, but none matched the serial numbers of Flight 19. Each discovery only deepened the puzzle. Today, nearly 80 years after that fateful day, Flight 19 remains a story suspended between fact and mystery. Were the men victims of navigational error and merciless seas? Or did something far stranger unfold in the waters east of Florida? The answer lies hidden beneath the waves, silent, unreachable, and unresolved. USS Cyclops, crew. The Atlantic Ocean has claimed many ships, but few disappearances are as puzzling as that of the USS Cyclops and her crew. Commissioned in 1910, the USS Cyclops was a massive collier ship in the U.S. Navy fleet, designed to transport coal to fuel naval vessels. At more than 540 feet long and displacing nearly 20,000 tons when fully loaded, it was considered one of the largest ships of its kind. During World War I, the Cyclops became an essential part of America's supply chain, ferrying coal and materials across the Atlantic. Yet, in March of 1918, it simply vanished without leaving behind a single trace. The ship departed from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in late February, carrying nearly 11,000 tons of manganese ore, a heavy, dense cargo used for steel production. On board were over 300 officers, sailors, and passengers. The voyage was meant to be routine. Travel north along the South American coast, stop in Barbados for refueling, and then continue to Baltimore. But somewhere between Barbados and the Chesapeake Bay, the Cyclops disappeared into silence. No distress call was ever received. No debris field was found. And despite extensive searches by the U.S. Navy, nothing was ever recovered. Not even an oil slick or a piece of wood. For a ship of that size, the total absence of physical evidence seemed almost impossible. Speculation began almost immediately. Some pointed to the ship's commander, Lieutenant Commander George Worley. Known as eccentric and difficult, Worley was rumored to have strained relationships with his crew. There were whispers of mutiny, though no records support such an event. Others questioned the ship's cargo. The manganese ore was unusually heavy, and reports suggested the ship had been overloaded, possibly compromising its stability. A sudden storm in the Atlantic could have easily overwhelmed a weakened hull. Yet, weather reports from the period show no record of a major storm along the route. And even in rough seas, it was expected that some wreckage would eventually wash ashore. The fact that not a single fragment of the ship was ever found only deepened the mystery. Some theories turned towards sabotage. It was 1918 and the First World War was still raging. German submarines prowled the Atlantic, targeting Allied vessels. Could the Cyclops have fallen victim to a torpedo attack? The idea seems plausible, yet there is no German naval record claiming responsibility, and even a torpedo strike should have left traces on the surface. Then came the more speculative explanations. Because the disappearance occurred within the region later popularized as the Bermuda Triangle, the Cyclops has often been linked to tales of supernatural forces, magnetic anomalies, or even otherworldly intervention. While these ideas capture the imagination, historians and naval experts generally view them as legends, built more from popular culture than from evidence. What makes the Cyclops case stand apart is the sheer scale of the loss. With over 300 men aboard, it remains the single largest non-combat loss of life in U.S. Navy history. Families waited for word, but none came. For them, the absence of closure was as heavy as the ocean itself. In the years that followed, sister ships to the Cyclops, the USS Proteus and USS Nereus, also vanished under mysterious circumstances, though those cases are often attributed to storms and structural flaws. Still, the echoes of the Cyclops linger, casting a shadow over naval history. Today, more than a century later, the USS Cyclops lies somewhere beneath the waves, its hull, its cargo, and its crew swallowed by the Atlantic. Whether it was a sudden structural failure, an act of war, or something far stranger, the truth remains concealed in the deep. And perhaps, hidden in the silent vastness of the ocean, the Cyclops still waits to be found. Its story unfinished, its secrets untold. Elisa Lam beneath the buzzing lights of downtown Los Angeles. In the early months of 2013, the mysterious disappearance of a young woman unfolded, one that would leave investigators, internet sleuths, and the public puzzled for years to come. Her name was Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old student from Vancouver, Canada, who had traveled alone to California. What began as a simple journey of exploration ended in one of the most perplexing modern mysteries. Elisa checked into the historic Cecil Hotel, a building with a reputation as unusual as its architecture. Constructed in the 1920s, the Cecil had become infamous over the decades, linked to crime, violence, and strange deaths. For some, it was a symbol of urban decline. For others, it was a place where misfortune seemed to concentrate. Into this setting, Elisa arrived, documenting her trip online with cheerful updates and photos, painting the picture of a curious young traveler. But by late January, her daily updates suddenly stopped. Family members grew concerned, and soon police were called. A search began inside and around the Cecil Hotel. Then came a breakthrough that would turn the case into something far more chilling. Security footage from the hotel elevator captured Elisa in her final known moments. The video, released to the public, shows Elisa stepping into the elevator, pressing multiple buttons, and appearing confused or alarmed. She peers outside as if looking for someone, moves in sudden, erratic gestures, and makes motions with her hands that have been described as both deliberate and strangely unexplainable. At one point, she hides in the corner, then steps back out into the hallway. The doors seem to malfunction, opening and closing without her entering. Minutes later, she vanishes from view. Days passed with no answers. Then, in mid-February, hotel guests began to complain about low water pressure and unusual taste from the taps. Maintenance workers climbed to the rooftop water tanks to investigate. Inside one of the large containers, the body of Elisa Lam was discovered. She had been missing for nearly 3 weeks. The circumstances raised countless questions. The rooftop was accessible only through locked doors and alarm stairwells, or by climbing up difficult fire escapes. The heavy lids of the water tanks were not easily moved, especially by one person. Yet there she was inside a sealed tank. The coroner's report offered one explanation, ruling her death an accidental drowning, with her bipolar disorder noted as a contributing factor. No evidence of drugs or alcohol was found, beyond medication consistent with her diagnosis. But the conclusion satisfied very few. How had Elisa reached the roof without setting off alarms? How did she manage to enter the tank by herself? And why did her behavior in the elevator appear so unusual, so unsettling? Speculation surged across the internet. Some suggested she may have suffered a severe mental health episode, while others believed foul play had gone undetected. Stranger theories emerged too, drawing connections to the Cecil Hotel's troubled history, to urban legends, and even to eerie coincidences involving past outbreaks in films with similar imagery. Years later, Elisa Lam's story continues to occupy a unique place in public imagination. It is studied in documentaries, discussed in online forums, and revisited by investigators who acknowledge the unanswered questions. Her final moments, preserved in a grainy video, remain as haunting as the day they were first revealed. Perhaps the truth lies in the overlap of tragic circumstance and human vulnerability. Or perhaps, as many still believe, there is something about the Cecil Hotel and Elisa Lam's fate that resists any simple explanation. The questions linger, suspended like shadows in the corridors of that building, leaving us to wonder what really happened on that rooftop in Los Angeles. Maura Murray on a cold February evening in 2004. A young nursing student named Maura Murray vanished along a desolate stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. She left behind a crashed car, a few scattered belongings, and a silence that has echoed through the years ever since. Maura's story begins just days earlier, when she quietly packed up her dorm room at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She emailed her professors, claiming there had been a death in the family, a detail that was later revealed to be untrue. That same day, she withdrew a small sum of money from her bank account, purchased alcohol from a nearby liquor store, and set out in her car, heading north without telling anyone why. The drive itself is a mystery. Maura passed through small towns and winding roads, making her way into rural New Hampshire. As the hours passed, darkness fell. Around 7:30 p.m., her car was found off the side of the road, facing the wrong direction. The front end was damaged, the airbags had deployed, and the windshield bore signs of an impact. A local bus driver, who stopped to check on her, later recalled that Maura appeared shaken but not injured. She declined his offer of help, saying she had already called roadside assistance, a claim that turned out to be false. By the time police arrived, Maura was gone. Inside her car, investigators discovered items that painted a puzzling picture. Her credit cards, her cell phone, and the alcohol she had purchased were missing. But her book on mountain climbing, her packed clothing, and printed directions to lodging in Vermont remained. There were no signs of a struggle in or around the vehicle, and no reliable footprints in the snow to indicate which way she went. It was as if she had simply vanished into the night. The search that followed was massive. Helicopters scanned the forest. 9 units attempted to trace her scent, but it faded just a few hundred feet from the crash site. Volunteers combed through frozen woods, streams, and abandoned structures. Yet no trace of Maura was ever found. Over the years, countless theories have been proposed. Some believe she ran away deliberately, seeking a new life far from the pressures of school, relationships, and personal struggles. Others suggest foul play, imagining an encounter on that dark road that ended in tragedy. There are those who point to the nearby White Mountains, arguing that she may have ventured into the wilderness and succumbed to the elements. Adding to the mystery are fragments of Maura's life that emerged after her disappearance. Her history included signs of stress, brushes with the law over minor incidents, and a recent car accident that left her shaken. Some saw these as clues to a deeper turmoil, while others viewed them as unrelated details magnified by hindsight. Despite extensive media coverage, countless internet forums, and dedicated investigators, the trail has remained cold. In the years since that night, no definitive evidence has surfaced to explain where Maura went or why. Each lead that once seemed promising has dissolved into uncertainty. Standing at the edge of Route 112 today, the scene remains eerily quiet. The road winds between woods and fields, much as it did on the night she disappeared. The absence of answers has turned Maura Murray's case into one of the most enduring modern mysteries, a puzzle that continues to attract both experts and ordinary people, all searching for a missing piece that has yet to appear. And so, nearly 2 decades later, the questions remain. Did Maura choose to vanish, or was her fate sealed by chance and circumstance on that lonely road? The answer lingers somewhere in the shadows, waiting, perhaps, to be found. Asha Degree in the early hours of February 14, 2000. A quiet town in North Carolina became the setting of one of America's most puzzling mysteries. 9-year-old Asha Degree left her home in Shelby in the middle of the night, stepping out into the dark and rainy morning, never to be seen again. Her story begins with an ordinary evening. Asha went to bed after spending the day with her family, attending church, and preparing for school the next day. Her parents checked on her at around 2:30 a.m., and everything seemed normal. Yet, sometime between then and 4 a.m., Asha quietly packed a small book bag, filled it with personal items, and walked out of her house into the storm. Witnesses later reported seeing a young girl walking alone along Highway 18, dressed in white clothing, braving the cold rain. For a child of her age, wandering in such conditions and at that hour was highly unusual. A truck driver even circled back after spotting her. But when he did, she had already disappeared into the darkness. The community immediately mobilized when her parents discovered she was missing. Search efforts involved law enforcement, neighbors, and volunteers. Dogs and helicopters were brought in, but no trace of Asha was found in the immediate area. Investigators soon realized this case was unlike the typical child disappearance. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of abduction from her bedroom. Instead, it appeared that Asha had deliberately chosen to leave on her own. Over the following days, pieces of the puzzle slowly emerged. In a nearby shed, searchers discovered a few of Asha's belongings, including a hair bow. Later, a construction worker found her book bag, double-wrapped in plastic, and buried along the highway miles from her home. Inside were clothes and books, some belonging to her, others not. This discovery deepened the mystery. Who had placed it there, and why? The investigation faced countless dead ends. Forensic evidence was limited, and Asha's young age made it difficult to piece together her motivations. Some speculated she may have run away, but her parents insisted she had no reason to. She was described as shy, happy, and deeply attached to her family. Others wondered if someone had lured her away, perhaps through a trusted connection, but no conclusive proof ever surfaced. Years passed, and tips occasionally reignited hope. In 2004, a witness claimed to have seen Asha getting into a dark green car, possibly a Ford Thunderbird or Lincoln Mark IV, near the area where she was last spotted. The lead was investigated, but no breakthrough came. In 2015, the FBI re-examined the case and released new details about items found in her bag, including a Dr. Seuss book checked out from her school library. Yet the trail remained cold. 2 decades later, the disappearance of Asha Degree continues to haunt both investigators and her community. Unlike many missing child cases, her decision to leave home on her own, at such an unusual time in bad weather and without clear cause, sets her apart. It raises questions that have never been answered. What compelled her to walk out that night? Did she intend to meet someone? Or was she simply searching for something that only she knew? To this day, her family holds onto hope, keeping her memory alive and waiting for answers. The mystery of Asha Degree lingers like an unfinished story, one with missing chapters, where every clue seems to lead to more uncertainty. And somewhere in the silence of that February night lies the truth of why a young girl walked away from her home, and what really happened after she vanished into the dark.